to ask you, can you see my screen right now?
Very clearly. It looks fantastic.
Oh, shucks. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, the Megalodon is one of those mythical kind of creatures simply because of its immense size. We are talking a shark that is the same size as a modern humpback whale, with a mouth so large it could swallow me whole. 240 teeth serrated like steak knives, some of which are the same size as my head. It was the biggest predator-prey interaction of all time as it feasted on the flesh of baleen whales some 3.5 million years ago. Now, its rise is well chronicled in the fossil record. It extends well in excess of over 100 million years. But what's quite surprising is how this animal disappeared from the fossil record entirely. This huge predator that was so successful for so long vanished without a trace. We're also going to be debunking some myths about some people who say that the Megalodon is still alive today. And it's a pretty interesting story, to say the least. So we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of different things. Let's get straight into it. Of course, I can't go too much further without acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I speak today, of the Bunwarang Nation, and their leaders past, present, and emerging, and that the land itself was never ceded. Now, this is a question that I regularly get after doing talks like this and to talking to members of the public. They often ask, and I think the Megalodon is still alive. I've seen a documentary recently that says that it was still swimming around at the bottom of the Mariana Trench with Jason Statham. Well, what can I say to you, my friends? This computer-generated image does the rounds every now and again, and it seems to depict a large humpback whale. We know that because of the immense fluke you can see. Sorry, not fluke. What is it again? Flipper on the side of the body there. That's probably at about 4 meters in length, and a whole bunch of entrails leaving the carcass there that seems to have been bitten by a much bigger animal. This image is doctored. It is fake, and some people think it's real. But like Meggie said in the corner there, that computer-generated whale had it coming. I've got my friend Meggie in the corner. They're going to be giving some quips throughout the entire presentation. It's going to be lots of fun, as you can imagine. But is the Megalodon still alive? No. Of course it's not. It's been dead for a shocking amount of time, at least 3.5 million years. Sorry, Maggie. I know that you'd like to be alive, but you're very, very dead. Why do we know that it's not alive? Because we would find some evidence, absolutely any evidence at all, of this humongous predator. Whether sharks go through tens of thousands of teeth in a given lifetime, Megalodon was no different. They would be shedding teeth. Those teeth would be washing up on shorelines. The ocean would be covered in blood from the prey that they were eating. Right there, there'd be so many dead whales washing up on shore. We wouldn't know what to do with it. We would find something of this incredible predator still alive in the modern era. So why is it that some people still think that the Megalodon is still alive? Well, unfortunately, we have to debunk a myth. The Discovery Channel, and I remember watching it when I was much younger. I used to love it for Shark Week. They produced a 2013 docu-fiction that said, Megalodon, the monster shark, lives. And basically, it attempted to present something that was fake as something that was true. It attracted the most viewers they've ever had to any documentary upon release. Almost 5 million individual people tuning into that show. And with their lineup of absolutely outrageous shows, Ancient Aliens being one of them. My favorite episode of Ancient Aliens is the one where they state that maybe the dinosaurs went extinct because of aliens. My absolute favorite show. So funny. But I also went out to watch Mermaids the Body Found, where they got a fake mermaid, threw it in the ocean, and pretended that they'd found a mermaid. It was really quite something. So one of the reasons people think the Megalodon is still alive is because the Discovery Channel showed this docu-fiction and actually showed another 2019 one of the Megalodon itself, saying, what is the evidence that we have for this animal? They have no evidence at all to suggest that it's still alive. So I just wanted to get that out of the way before we go any further at all. It is well and truly dead. I wish it was kind of still around. It'd be pretty amazing to see. What is the Meg is the next question we've got to ask. Well, it's the biggest shark that's ever lived. 5 ever is one more than 4 ever. And in my honest opinion, this was a shark that was getting to at least 50 metric tons, the same size as that of a humpback whale, but it maybe even got larger, maybe 80 metric tons. We just don't know. Some estimates put it at between 15 and 16 meters in length, half the size of a basketball court. And this was a specialist, predating large marine mammals such as small baleen whales. It was an evolutionary war between the Megalodon and baleen whales, the likes of which that we do not see today. So they existed, the Megalodon itself, the species existed from probably around 15.9 in the middle Miocene all the way to the early to mid Pliocene of about 3.51 million years ago. A paper came out in 2019 to suggest that they were absolutely extinct by 3.2 million years ago. And Maggie's right, if they were still alive, they probably could have taken out something as big as a blue whale, the biggest creature that's ever lived. The tooth that you can see at the top there is actually a tooth that I found in Bayside in 2018, and it is one of the biggest ever found on the continent of Australia. You can imagine how excited I was when I found that. So the first question we're going to really be probably digging into is, how did the Megalodon evolve into the biggest shark of all time? And as Maggie suggests, it has a lot to do with the evolution of one of the greatest mammal lineages the world has ever seen, that of the whales. The evolutionary origins are very messy. We actually know very little about exactly where they came from. In the 1990s and early 2000s, it was once thought that great white sharks were living descendants of the Megalodon itself. But if you look at the image to the right, we've compared the serrations up along the delicate blade of the animal itself. So that's the tooth that you can see. The blade is the cutting edge. When you look at the regular serrations of the Megalodon, they are very different from that of the modern great white shark at the bottom. To infer that they're even closely related is just a joke. There's no way that you could ever suggest it with the evidence that we have right now. We suspect that the Megalodon came from a family of sharks that originated from the mid-Cretaceous at roughly 110 million years ago, known as the Odontidae. And like I said before, we primarily use teeth as evidence to ascertain speciation, and it makes it really difficult because teeth is not the best evidence that we have in terms of defining what species is different from one another. Just to give you an idea of how messy it is, paleontologists are fallen into two distinct groups. They don't even know what to call the Megalodon, whether or not the Latin binomial name is Carcass Megalodon to distinguish it away from that of great white sharks, or whether or not to infer its family lineage of Otodontidae as Otodus Megalodon. I'm one of the groups that believe that it's Otodus. It's a really interesting mix, but it just goes to show we know nothing about this animal to this very day. And like I mentioned before, this was an evolutionary war with marine mammals, dugongs, and whales. So we're going to go to the very first evolutionary origin of the Megalodon that we can find in the fossil record. It dates back roughly 110 million years ago and had a huge geological range all the way up until about 46 million years ago. Cretalamna. This was only a small shark by Megalodon standards, only getting to about 2 to 3 meters in length, but they had a broad triangular cusp for a tooth. And critically, and one thing that we'll discuss later on, the teeth also have something known as two lateral cusplets, two tiny little triangles that come from the roots of the tooth. But we'll talk about that a little later. As I mentioned in the slide, it's an absolute taxonomic mess. And if you're a paleontologist and you see that an animal has a range from 110 million years ago to 46 million years ago, red flags are coming up, because smack bang in the middle of that was the dinosaur extinction event, which had a huge adverse reaction to many different marine animals, especially sharks that probably suffered very heavily from that extinction event. How did Cretalamna survive that mass extinction? We just don't know. The basis of its teeth and some sparse remains, we think that it was a pretty generalist feeder. It probably ate large-bodied sharks, and at this stage, whales had not yet evolved on the scene. The next in this evolutionary story is that of Otodus obliquus, and it was a big shark, getting to great white shark proportions. Some have even suggested that this was 9 meters in length. I think it was a little bit less, 6 to 7 meters long, but irrespective of how you see it, this was a big shark. It lived at around 55 to 45 million years ago. And what is particularly interesting is that at about 50 million years ago, the earliest whales are only just beginning to go back into the water. 50 million years ago, whales walked on land. So what on earth were they eating instead? It's possible that they were eating very large-bodied fish like that of tuna, but also maybe dugongs, the other marine mammal that was still around. Now, the youngest teeth at about 45 million years ago have very slight serrations up along the blade. Now, serrations are really useful in teeth. If you have a steak knife, the steak knife that you'll see has tiny little bumps going up and down the knife itself and allows it to carve through rough flesh. These serrations on the teeth of these animals probably did exactly the same, and it seems to be evidence of a worldwide transitional event where they start eating marine mammals. If you've ever been given a tooth, a fossil tooth, as a present, Maggie says there, many obliquus tooth come from Morocco because of the phosphate mines that are found there. Thousands are found all over the world. They're quite cheap and inexpensive to buy. The next in this evolutionary story is Otodus auriculatus. It just flows off the tongue so well, auriculatus. At about 45 to 34 million years ago, this was the megatoothed shark of the Eocene. Teeth over 11 centimeters in length. And the teeth themselves, this is basically the only evidence that we have of Otodus auriculatus are their teeth. And they're characterized by relatively bulbous roots that you can see in the image just there, those ragged, smaller triangular lateral cusplets on the blade of the tooth. And we know that they were probably eating other whales, which are called cetaceans, and dugong relatives, that of sirenians. And Maggie's right there. This is the great-grandmama of the Megalodon. And when you look at this tooth, it bears a lot of similarities to that of a Megalodon. In 2018, though, we came across something particularly interesting. We noticed that there was something in the side of the cliff through the help of members of the public. Phil Mullally, who is a citizen scientist who's been helping the team at Museums Victoria, discovered a huge boulder that had fallen off the cliff itself. Inside were these jet black, gorgeous shark teeth from the Oligocene aged megatoothed shark Carcass angustidens, or Otodus angustidens as it's called. And what we found in the block were a number of other teeth from 6 gilled sharks that appeared to be feasting around the carcass of this megatoothed shark. It was an awesome story. You can see me in the image there, the furthest away from everyone, just ready to get out into the field and find all the fossils. Where else would I be? Ahead of the pack, of course. So Otodus angustidens is utterly fascinating. This was an animal that was clearly big, 9 meters long, the undisputed top predator throughout the Oligocene epoch between 34 and 23 million years ago. And it does straddle a very significant period in whale evolution, with the 2 major groups that we see today, that of the baleen-bearing whales such as the rorquals, which include humpbacks, blues, and fins, and the odontocetes, that of the toothed whales, start to appear for the very first time in the fossil record. These teeth are serrated triangular daggers, perfect for searing through flesh like that of whales. And a really cool fact, in this event in 2018, we found about 40 associated teeth from one single individual. This is just a handful of what we found and the best teeth that we found. But the most complete specimen of angustidens ever found had a jaw-dropping 165 associated teeth and 32 vertebrae. Could you imagine coming across a find like that? Outstanding. We'll actually be talking about that specimen later on. And as Maggie says, this is the grandma shark. Don't get it stuck in your head. It's already stuck in mine. The last one in this evolutionary story before we get to that of the Megalodon is the glorious shark of Chubut of Argentina, but they're found worldwide, including that of Australia, Otodus chubutensis, 10 meters in length. The teeth are masses, up to 4 inches long. And you'll notice something very striking about the tooth as well, the lack of those tiny little triangles coming off the side of the blade, those lateral cusplets. Why have the lateral cusplets gotten smaller? Well, it probably allowed the tooth to present a longer, continuous, serrated blade for cutting into their prey. Just an awesome, most wonderful predator. But basically, all we find of this animal are teeth and maybe the occasional vertebrae, if we're lucky. So, now we're going to go into the Megalodon itself. We've had a look at their ancestry. We've seen where they've come from, and I've shown you, yes, we know something about them, but the evidence is still relatively sparse considering we only really look at their teeth. But what evidence do we have of the Megalodon itself? Show me what you got. Well, lots and lots of teeth. And surprisingly, there are even associated dentitions from single individuals that are known worldwide, from Aurora in the States, from Peru in South America, from Belgium and the Netherlands in Europe as well. There are a number of individuals have died with all of their teeth still intact. Unfortunately, though, what we haven't really found is a very large individual megalodon with its teeth and the vertebrae still preserved to give an idea of its overall size. There is one specimen from the Netherlands that has teeth and vertebrae, but it represents an individual that's probably only approaching 9 meters in length and not the 15 plus meters that we needed to. To the right, you can find some isolated megalodon teeth that we found in Bayside, and they're very rare to find anywhere in Australia, and the ones that we find in Bayside are very important because they are some of the youngest we can find, not just on the continent, but also anywhere in the world. Maggie's also right. When eating, this animal would often bite into its own teeth by accident. They've even been known to swallow their teeth, and then that tooth is then being preserved in the fossil record itself. Really astonishing stuff. This was a terrifying predator. There is nothing that even really comes close to that of the megalodon in terms of its ferocity, except for maybe one animal that we'll talk about later on. There's also postcranial material that from the neck down, vertebrae are found, but, and I put an asterisk next to that but, do they really come from the megalodon? It's very difficult to show. Now, I talked about how there was that incredible specimen that had 165 teeth associated in a single block from one single individual from New Zealand. You can see that on the side there, they were also preserved with vertebrae. So we can look at the grandmother of the megalodon, look at the size of those vertebrae and infer different things. We know that if we do find megalodon vertebrae, they have to be hockey puck shaped and they're up to 15 centimeters in length, but the size of the vertebrae varies along the skeleton itself. And can we be sure that they are megalodon and not that of other filter feeding sharks? It's a really good question. Filter feeding sharks get to huge sizes. We look at basking sharks and whale sharks, 10, 12 meters in length. They would have vertebrae converging on similar sizes as that of the megalodon and may have looked very similar as well. So it's really hard to say. Cartilage as a whole, which basically comprises the majority of the skeleton of sharks, does not preserve well in the fossil record. So we don't expect to find entire skeletons. Teeth, though, which is made of apatite, a very dense bone-like thing, preserve very well, which is why we find so many teeth. And also consider the bias of the fossil record. Sharks are going through tens of thousands of teeth in a given lifetime. It makes a lot of sense that we find a lot of teeth before we even find one single vertebrae, let alone an entire skeleton, which is what we need to determine the true size of this animal. We can find poo of the megalodon as well. And how on earth can you tell that this is the poo of the megalodon? Well, you have to start looking at the modern anatomy of sharks as well. Now, sharks have a corkscrew shape of their colon, so you would expect to see something that looks a little bit like Mr. Whippy for a poo. And Maggie's right, it still does look really wet. But they had, as we know with most really large macropredatory sharks, tiger sharks, which are very distantly related to great white sharks, they have short digestive tracts. So whale bone is occasionally found in some of these poops, and even some of their own fragments of teeth that they accidentally swallowed can be seen in this poop. But they're very dense, as you can tell from this photo just here. One of the best pieces of evidence that we have for the megalodon and then predating whales are feeding traces in the bone. These animals did not lay up. They went to everything under the bus, and they just feasted on anything that was in the water. The serrated marges in the bone match the serrated blade of that of a megalodon. Now, these are some bite marks on marine mammal remains from the late Miocene of Peru, and you can see they're just absolutely everywhere. One issue, though, is were they actively predating on these marine mammals, particularly that of whales? And it's hard to prove active predation because we weren't there 3.5 million years ago as they were taking down these whales. What is very cool is that in discussion with other paleontologists worldwide and having seen a number of unconfirmed, unpublished specimens from a number of localities all over the world, there is evidence that the megalodon bit into some animals and then the bone healed after the event where the tooth had gone into the bone itself. There's even some, and it's particularly a fantastic specimen from Peru that I believe, where there's a tiny tip of the megalodon tooth embedded in the bone, and the bone is healed over, which shows this incredible active predation, something that, you couldn't have imagined that we'd ever find in the fossil record itself. So there's no doubt that small baleen whales were Maggie's favorite, and they were eating a lot of them. God, you can only imagine how red the water would have been in the ocean at this time. Truly terrifying. Now, where a megalodon remains found, and basically, if you can find a marine fossil deposit throughout the Miocene, and particularly that of the early Pliocene up until about 3.5 million years ago, including Melbourne, you can find them. They've been found on basically every single continent. So they were very popular. They were absolutely everywhere until that untimely demise 3.5 million years ago. Now, what is it that they ate? And this is a fascinating topic. If we had 40 minutes, I would probably talk to you just about this slide in itself. Everything that was in the ocean. We know that they were eating seals, turtles, baleen whales, toothed whales, sperm whales, a fascinating group known as the desmostylids, which looks like hippos, but were in no way related to them. Giant marine sloths. You heard right. Such a thing did exist off the coast of Peru some 5 to 6 million years ago. They got to 2 meters in height. The ones on land were as big as an elephant. But the ones that decided to take on the ecological niche of a dugong 5 to 6 million years ago only got to between 2 and 2.5 meters in height. Huge seabirds, such as that of the pelargonithids, gomphotheres, elephant relatives. As you can see in this image just here, being chased, there is evidence of them from the Houston Museum of Texas, where bite marks from a megalodon have been found on the bones of these elephants, which is just wild. And of course it would happen, but whether or not the animal had died and then it was scavenging it, bloat and float, is anyone's guess. Large fish, everything. In fact, we think that they may have even eaten each other inside the womb. Now, intrauterine cannibalism is something that occurs to this very day with a number of sharks that we find on the planet. The Grainer shark is quite possibly the most famous example of this, that one of the babies wake up in utero and eats all of its brothers and sisters. But in order to get to this great size, some paleontologists and scientists have speculated that maybe what they did is they had something very similar to that of great white sharks. They practiced oophagy, where the mother gave unfertilized eggs to the baby in the developing womb in order to eat before they got to their gigantic size. Some estimates suggest that before they were born, the megalodon was 2 meters long as it came out of the birthing canal. Can you imagine how long the female would need to wait around just for the one single baby? And it's not the biggest baby in the world, though. Biggest baby that's ever existed is the blue whale, and it is there is no way any other creature is getting anywhere close to it. Babies are up to 6 to 7 meters in length. Could you imagine pushing that through? No thanks. So, how big was it? It is hotly debated. Carolina Reaper height. It's the hottest pepper in the world at 2,200,000 Scoville units. It makes grown men cry and go to the toilet almost immediately upon eating it. You can go to the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology and announce to everyone that you have figured out the size of the megalodon. You can say they are 15 to 16 meters in length, and a whole host of other paleontologists will come out of the rafters and say, no, it's not. It's even bigger than that. No, it's not. It's much smaller than that. Number of new studies are coming out every single year that contradict each other. And one very important thing to note in these studies is that they all use tooth size as a basis of trying to understand overall size of the megalodon. But in order to infer that, we need skeletons of the megalodon to draw proper conclusions. We just can't use any other evidence. Many of these papers also use relatives such as the great white shark in order to infer size. But the great white shark is separated by more than 100 million years with that of the megalodon. They are very different animals. Who is to say that maybe the megalodon just had a really big mouth and a small body? It's almost impossible to say. So I am of the belief that the megalodon only got to between 15 and 16 meters in length. There are some papers that state that it was bigger, at 22 meters long, but we need concrete evidence to really state that evidence. I've never had the Carolina Reaper for the record. I think it would be terrifying to eat that, but it really scares me, as a matter of fact. So now we come to the really interesting conclusion of this talk itself. Why and how did one of the biggest predators the world has ever seen go extinct? Well, let's go to the very first one. Probably got something to do with geographical barriers and not enough of the right kinds of prey for the Megalodon. Now, at this time, at around 3.5 to 4 million years ago, the Earth is going through a radical cooling, the beginning of the ice ages as we know it. The Arctic, critically, is starting to freeze up, and geographical barriers such as the closing of the Panama Seaway would have hampered taxon dispersal. In the Antarctic, freezing had been occurring from about the Eocene of roughly 34 million years. So it's more or less the effect of both sides of the world starting to freeze over that would have had this adverse effect on the Megalodon. Now, as we'll discuss in the next slide, there was a general trend towards huge body size in baleen whales, and this would have had some kind of effect on the Megalodon and would have fragmented a reduced geographic range of the Megalodon itself, and critically, its prey, which would have been small types of baleen whales. There's a pygmy right whale that you can see over to the right. I just think it's a fantastic image because it shows you just how big these whales were probably getting. It still lives to the modern day and is probably a relic of the time when the Megalodon lived. Even though it's a small baleen whale, it has those huge keratinous racks in the upper mouth. It still probably weighs as much as an Asian elephant. So we say small, but it's still a massive creature. And Meggie makes a really interesting point as well, and I really do want to talk about this one just a little bit of time. Did some baleen whales hide in the shallows to avoid being chickens? Meggie, terrible. And it's entirely possible. We look at southern right whales today. They still hide in the shallows from much larger predators. Well, I should say not larger predators, but that of orcas that gang up on these whales and eat them. We know that they do eat southern right whales. Maybe the southern right whales migrating up the coast went into shallow areas as a way of avoiding megalodons many millions of years ago and have adopted that into the modern time to cope with that of orcas. It's a really cool behavioral thing that may have continued even though the megalodon went extinct at roughly 3.5 million years ago. Let's not forget that baleen whales started to become absolutely massive. And when I say massive, you have no idea just how big they are. The blue whale is the same size as a basketball court. They weigh the same as 30 African elephants. Not much stands in their way. And like I mentioned before, there was dramatic periods of glacial formation between 3 and 3.5 million years ago, but particularly in the Arctic, and it established hypergigantism, more than 12 meters in length, as the dominant baleen whale size. Unfortunately, though, most smaller baleen whales survived the extinction date of the megalodon. So I don't know if this alone is really concrete enough evidence for its extinction. We need to be looking at something else. Also, fun fact, blue whale can eat in excess of 4 metric tons of food every single day. Wild stuff. The cold is a really critical one to look at when understanding the extinction of the megalodon. And in order to really understand it, you need to look at the anatomy of modern sharks. Now, all sharks acquire fat in the form of squalene in their liver, which can comprise more than 1/3 of their entire body length. Unlike mammals, we can basically put our fat all throughout our body, especially on my butt. But it is possible that the megalodon could not follow these ancient baleen migratory routes simply because it started getting too cold and forced it into warmer areas which were devoid of prey. So one of the reasons that lists why the megalodon went extinct could not follow the ancient migratory routes of these baleen whales that started moving up into the Arctic and Antarctic to feast on the glut of food that it was presented with. We know that modern great whites, which are endothermic animals, they retain a body temperature above that of the surrounding water temperature, and we presume that the megalodon would have had to have done that too, being such a massive animal that we look at the modern time, it cannot migrate far south or north, even though the food is highly plentiful. Have you seen how many seals are in the Antarctic? There's a lot. There's lots of penguins as well. And there is a very good reason why they go there, because the great white simply cannot reach them. So it may have died simply from sticking around in the equator and starving to death. Oh, I'm going a little bit far. Another theory concerns that of the rise of the large oceanic dolphins, that of the killer whales, and at the end of the Pliocene, the first orcas at about 3 million years ago start to appear in the fossil record. Now, what's really interesting to note is that the oldest known killer whale in the fossil record is Orcainus citianensis, described from Japan, but its remains imply a much smaller animal, probably only getting to about 4 meters in length, and the authors who wrote about it said that it probably wasn't eating very big prey on the basis of its tooth size. But one thing that I do want to add is that the fossil record is incredibly biased. Not everything survives in the fossil record. 99.9% of everything that's ever lived will never be preserved in the fossil record. So it's possible that they are out there and we just haven't found them yet. We know that modern orcas, there are groups, particularly of killer whales, morphotypes, that feed exclusively on sharks and have been known to eat great white sharks as well. And when they do, they eat their livers because, like I said before, it's the fattiest part of the animal and let the rest of the carcass just drift away. So could you imagine how much of a liver would be there for the Megalodon? Meggie has every right to be absolutely scared out of her mind. Another really interesting theory concerns the rise of the killer sperm whales at roughly the same time as that of the Megalodon. And around 12 to 15 million years ago, giant macroraptorial physeteroids, that of sperm whales, dominated the globe. The absolute largest was called Livyatan, and there are a number of small varieties that were getting to, even the smallest size was getting to roughly the same size as that of the, sorry, just give me one moment. And even the absolute smallest size were getting to roughly the same size as a modern orca. So they were tremendous. The biggest one, Livyatan, 17.5 meters in length. It had a skull that was the size of a small car, huge artillery-sized teeth. You can see me holding one that's been found in Beaumaris, which is the largest tooth that has ever been found in all of Australia, and some of the youngest evidence we have for killer sperm whales anywhere in the world. This was a predator that was capable of taking out not just other baleen whales, but in private discussion with other paleontologists, they think that they may have even fed on the Megalodon in a very similar way that orcas feed on great white sharks today. But the confusing thing is it lived at roughly the same time as the Megalodon and went extinct as the same time as the Megalodon as well. So whatever is impacting the Megalodon is also having an adverse effect on Livyatan and these smaller sperm whales as well. Please don't eat my liver. It's pretty funny. This one is the most ridiculous one by far. I absolutely hate it, as you can imagine. And unfortunately, it's out there in the literature, and we do have to discuss it. Did a space fart kill off the Megalodon? Now, prior to 2019, the Megalodon was once thought to have gone extinct at the Pleistocene boundary of roughly 2.6 million years ago. And some space authors basically say that the supernova coated the Earth in muon radiation, which is very harmful for very large creatures, especially along the coastline. They think that this adverse reaction would have spelt the doom for much smaller baleen whales, and in turn also created the extinction of the Megalodon. And I can tell you right now, this theory has been thoroughly debunked. We know that the Megalodon went extinct well and truly before this well-documented supernova at the Pleistocene boundary. So don't worry, a space fart is not responsible for killing off the Megalodon. I absolutely think it's hilarious. The very last one we're going to be talking about today is that of great white sharks. And the question that might come to mind when you're thinking of this is, how does a much smaller shark outcompete something that's much larger? Great white sharks today can get to about 6 meters in length and weigh 2 metric tons. The Megalodon, on the other hand, even at the lower estimates, 15 meters long, half the size of a basketball court, and weighing the same as a humpback whale at 50 metric tons. Well, what may have been happening is more mature individuals of great whites that got to those 6 meter long ranges were out-competing the juvenile megalodons and basically knocking them out of the rink. And according to one exclusion principle, it stipulates that two species cannot coexist if they occupy the exact same niche. Now, this is confusing, though, because we know that Megalodon and Livyatan probably occupied the same niche and coexisted for millions of years. But it's possible that the huge evolutionary success of the great white shark may have resulted in the downfall of the megalodon. And the fossil deposits around Australia, and particularly that of Victoria, also document it very well. We start to see them developing the serrations along the blade from a Mako-esque lineage. And by about 4 million years ago, they attain worldwide supremacy, outcompeting the megalodon in many fossil deposits. Their teeth are just absolutely everywhere in one spectrum, whereas the megalodon is disappearing from roughly 4 million years ago. So there you have it. There was a culmination of factors that led to the demise of the megalodon. And you're right, my goodness, it would have been an amazing sight to have seen the predation of a megalodon on a whale, and kind of would have liked to have seen it, but also wouldn't like to have seen it at the same time. But there's no doubt that this animal has been dead since at least 3.2 million years ago on the basis of the fossil evidence that we found worldwide. But the localities around Melbourne have a humongous role to play in understanding the evolution and downfall of this mighty predator. Here is footage that was collected by my colleague Connor Brecken, a citizen scientist, in late 2021. He's diving in Beaumaris, a site that's roughly 5 to 6 million years of age. Can you guess what he's about to find? I've kind of made it really obvious with the silhouette of the hand and the tooth there as well. He's strapped a GoPro to his chest and he's just about to dive to the bottom of the sea floor. Let's experience it with him. And apologies as well for the language that you might hear from Connor, and if you are able to decipher it through his mask as well. So you can see a stingery in the corner there. It's covered in sand. Sea urchins all throughout, strewn throughout the bottom of the seafloor itself. You can hear that tiny little cracking noise in the background. He dives down to the bottom of the seafloor, and he goes to pick up the tooth. Bang. There it is. Just a partial tooth, but what's really important about this one is that it retains the sediments of the formation that it's from, so we can date it accurately, knowing that it's come from this formation. And this is just one of many finds that Connor has made throughout his time in Bayside that are changing our view on when the megalodon went extinct. He's pretty happy with himself. I don't know if you can even hear that noise, but he's very happy. So there's also exceptional preservation of shark remains from Bayside. I found these two specimens in mid-2020. The one that I'm holding in the left with the cliffs of Beaumaris in the background represents articulated vertebrae, shark remains from a shark that's about 5 million years of age. The vertebrae themselves are the same size as my fist. They are huge, and we're not entirely sure exactly what shark it's come from. We know that it comes from a lamniform shark, so one that was either probably a great white or a small megalodon. But this was found at the bottom of the sea floor, just lying there waiting to be picked up. Critical evidence for understanding the evolution of this group in Australia, and especially trying to figure out their size. The unfortunate thing about this block is it was not associated with any teeth, but it demonstrates the possibility of finding an entire megalodon skeleton at this locality. Later in the year, we also found these smaller lamniform shark vertebrae to the left of the hand that probably come from the great white shark ancestor Carcharodon histalis. But recently we found this huge block again in late 2020, and inside of it are 3 articulated vertebrae. But what's more exciting than that is there's also a large bulbous tooth sticking out of it. It's been held within the collections of Museums Victoria, as are all the specimens that we'll be talking about later on in this presentation. We need the time to prep it, but unfortunately we don't have that time to prepare this specimen and truly identify exactly what this shark is. This was found only a couple of meters away from the much larger set of vertebrae, maybe 10 meters away from it. And I remember finding it on the bottom of the seafloor, mask on, holding my breath and looking at it a bunch of times. Algae had encrusted the surface of it. The entire block itself probably weighs about 30 kilograms. There was a blue-ringed octopus that came out of one of the crevices. I want to prep this specimen. There's a lot that this particular individual rock can teach us, specifically about whether it's the evolution of great white sharks and their rise in the fossil record, or whether or not this is postcranial material associated with the tooth of the megalodon, and who knows what else is in this block until we start to prepare it. So one of the most exciting finds that I've made this year is this. And one of the theories concerning the extinction of the Megalodon looks at the rise of the oceanic dolphins, that of the killer whales. One of my favorite bones to find in the fossil record is that of ear bones from whales. They're wonderfully diagnostic. They can tell us a lot of information about what those animals were doing many millions of years ago. In this image just here, and in this video that I'm just about to play to you, is the internalmost ear bone of a type of large oceanic dolphin. Now, this ear bone is called a periotic. It holds the internal cochlear region, the semicircular ear canals, and it tells us that there were large oceanic dolphins starting to get to the size of an orca, appearing at a critical junction of evolutionary time. This is some of the first evidence that we've ever found for this group and in the fossil record entirely. So let's watch it. This site was at Site B, a site that we discovered back in 2018 with the help of members of the public. You can see my hands. Whoop. The waft got a little bit too hectic just there. You can see the goby darting off into the corner, and there it is. If you can hear the audio, you can hear me being very giddy with my laugh just there. So it's a really important specimen. And the next thing that we need to do is absolutely determine that it does come from the fossil deposits of Site B. I think it does. I think it is 5 million years. I think it is the nail in the coffin that we need to understand the rise of the oceanic dolphins, which would then cement the extinction of the Megalodon, which is pretty exciting. So you can help us find these fossils and others. For $5 a month on Patreon, you can help me launch these expeditions and rescue the heritage of Melbourne. It's the same as the price of coffee every single month. In return, what we'll give you is never before seen footage of what it takes to find these fossils on the bottom of the seafloor. And it's not just the Megalodon. It's giant marsupials the size of cows. It's the largest bird that's ever existed. These specimens are lying there. They're waiting for somebody to find. I've spent more than a decade looking for this material, and now I need your help. Every single one of the specimens that you've seen and that I will find as well will make their way into the state collection of Museums Victoria, where we can study them in perpetuity. So go to A Fool's Experiment on Patreon and donate if you can. We do need your support to find this incredible fossil material lying on the bottom of the seafloor that is changing the way in which we view the evolution of life itself. Melbourne is really special. We have all these incredible fossil deposits, whether or not it's down the peninsula, whether or not it's towards Geelong, going along the surf coast. This material is there, and we need to start collecting it. So thank you for watching. I hope you've had an incredible time. I've had an absolutely mind-blowingly fun time talking to you about the rise and fall of the Megalodon. I'm going to, hopefully that song does not get stuck in your head. We're going to stop sharing, and what we can do as well is we can open it up to the chat itself. I'll also put in the Patreon link so that you can go to it as well. There we go, so you can see it just there. So, Nadav, Lisa, were there any particularly interesting questions that you'd like to pick out so we can continue discussing about the rise and fall of the Megalodon?
Ben, I will jump in there because I just, I'm astounded. You're amazing as usual, incredible. I don't know how you keep up that intensity. Before we started this event, you did say you had a coffee, and I wish that coffee had the same kind of effect that it has on you, that it has on me. That was just incredible. I couldn't believe watching some of those slides. There was the serration on the teeth. It's like there's teeth on teeth.
Yeah, it's absolutely wild, isn't it? And when you feel it along against your finger as well, like they could still cut you up, that's how sharp these teeth still are. It's completely wild when there is no greater thrill to me than actually finding Megalodon teeth, because that once you found a big one, that it's a humongous predator. There's nothing that really compares to it. I did notice that there was a really interesting question from Dan, just quickly, if we can go to that one. She asks, whales walk on land, ? And you're right. Yeah. Can you please explain the evolutionary process, what they evolved to and how? Thank you. So no worries then. We'll answer that one there. We're actually going to be giving another talk in April that looks at the evolution of whales and how they once walked on land and came back into the water itself. And again, it is a topic that requires probably a firm hour to talk about because it's utterly fascinating. But 50 million years ago, the fossil evidence states that whales walked on land. They were about the same size as Labradors. They looked like otters. They had four legs, and a furry coat like that of a dog. So it's astounding to think that an animal like a blue whale or a sperm whale or a beaked whale, which is the deepest diving mammal of all time, has evolved from a creature that once walked on land. But we look at the attributes of modern whales today. They have lungs. They need to breathe. Some of them have hair follicles still on the end of their nose. When you look at their hands, they have the pentadactyl limb, just in the same way that we have 5 digits as well. They still have the vestigial remains of their hind limbs. And what we see in the fossil record is this incredible transitional set of fossils. The earliest known, proper, most complete whale in the fossil record is called Palaeontologist. It's been found off the Indo-Pakistan region of Pakistan, as you might imagine. And what we see in the fossil record for the next 5 million years are transitional forms that slowly lose their hind legs, telescope their face, simplify their dentition, lose that hair, lose those hind legs. And within a very short amount of time, just less than 8 to 10 million years, they get to a form known as Basilosaurus, which is an 18-meter long mega predator. It's really astounding how quickly they did it. Now, the reason why they did it was because of food. There was a glut of food after the dinosaur extinction event at around 10 million years ago. The first whales started to decide to go back into the water. 65 million years ago, 66 million years ago, we have that absolutely traumatic setting where that massive meteorite shudders into the Yucatan Peninsula and wipes out 75% of all life. And included in that are the marine reptiles. So they're available to them with this empty ecological niche for them to take advantage of. And whales did it ever so effectively. So thank you for that, Dan.
Ben, I've found a question that I think would
Yes.
be great to hear the answer of. It comes from Virginia, and it's the Megalodon is thought to have given birth to its young close to the shore, and these shallow coastal waters would have provided a nursery for the pups, protecting them from predators that were lurking in the open water, like the large-toothed whales. And do you know if there is evidence of pups in the Beaumaris area?
That's a great question, actually. And traditionally speaking, at least within the last 30 to 50 years, we've had a look at most of the fossil remains that have come from Beaumaris. The vast majority seem to come from very large individual megalodons. So the interpretation at the moment is that the megalodon probably was a seasonal predator. It probably came along the coastline and may not have actually bred along the coastline of Victoria itself, simply due to the fact that there's just not many small teeth of megalodons that are found. Now, there are some teeth that have been found of small individuals. Barb and Elevay, citizen scientists who have been looking at Site B and Beaumaris, they recently found a tooth from a small individual of a megalodon, which disproves that theory completely. We know that they were coming here when they were younger. There seems to be some kind of taphonomic bias. When they lose their teeth, they're not getting preserved as well as that of, say, Carcharodon histalis, which is the ancestor of the great white shark. We know that there was a huge breeding colony for this ancestor of the great white shark everywhere. We find every single size tooth. It's possible that the breeding areas of this primitive great white shark may have outcompeted the megalodon in Australia 5 to 6 million years ago. But we need more evidence in order to be absolutely certain. And the only way we can do that is to continue to launch the expeditions and find as much fossil material as possible. So thank you, Virginia. Good to see you again as well.
Okay, there's a question from Amy, and that is, why do the fossils seem to be right on the surface of the ocean floors? TB has taught me that you need to dig very deep holes to find stuff. Is our area eroding quickly or something like that, or ocean areas in general?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I get this question a bit, and it's a fair question to ask because there's not many fossil areas anywhere in the world where you can just pick up fossils and they're loose at the bottom of the sea floor. It seems to be the Goldilocks effect. It's just right. So when you look at Beaumaris as an example, there is the cliff and the monocline, and the sediments are deposited one after the other on top of each other. And then just as it hits the water's edge, we notice that there's a dip that then turns into the water itself from the fossil strata. And that dip has then exposed every single possible layer on the bottom of the sea floor. And with the ebb and flow of the tide and the winds and everything else, it basically rips these fossils from the fossil strata. And because the fossils are stronger than the surrounding sediment in most cases, they have a tendency to preserve very well. And we tend to find, I'd say 99% of the finds that I make are loose on the bottom of the seafloor because of it. And who knows when they were originally dislodged? It could have been hundreds of years ago, if not thousands of years ago. And then they've just been hidden in the sand, and then they've been found again. There was this utterly fantastic example by citizen scientist Connor Brecken. He found a segment of upper jaw from a type of beaked whale, and it happened to coincide and join onto a segment of upper jaw that had been found in the 1970s, I think 1975, by Tim Flannery, and it fit perfectly. And the reason we found it was because the sands had basically been drastically reduced in the area. The next year, in June of 2021, we went for a dive, and can you guess what he found? He found even more evidence of that exact same skull of that beaked whale. And the reason we found it was because of the ebb and flow of the tide and the sand regime itself. So it's a really great question. And really what it comes down to is we are very, very lucky to have these fossil deposits. There are not many that ever do this.
Okay, given it's dinner time, I thought maybe you could answer Katya's question, and that is, what would be the food requirements for an adult megalodon, and what was the population density?
Oh, that's a great question, and I really wish that I could appropriately answer those ones as well. I mentioned very early on that there is a bias in the fossil record to preserve shark teeth. And one of the reasons there's that bias is because sharks lose lots and lots of teeth in a given lifetime. And the estimate varies drastically depending on the shark itself. Reef sharks are estimated to lose 12,000 teeth every single lifetime. That could be even higher for other lamniform sharks, such as great white sharks, because they're piercing into really hard prey and they're probably breaking their teeth on them as well. So in terms of population density, we won't ever really know that answer. We might be able to have more concrete evidence if we had full articulated skeletons of the megalodon, but that's something we just don't find because of the preservation bias towards cartilage. It tends to just wear away almost immediately. So what was the population density? I can't tell you. There's absolutely no way that I can tell you. I can say that, as a general rule, predators right at the top of the food chain there's not as many as you would consider to be as prey. And that makes a lot of sense. You wouldn't expect to find more lions than you would zebras on the Serengeti. And what are we to make of the alleged complete juvenile? Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. To my knowledge, and from what I've been able to see of it, it represents a 9-meter long individual. I don't know if they've really collected it very well, unfortunately. There's two specimens that we refer to here as well. There's one that was found in the Netherlands in particular, but there's also one that's been found from Peru. And the fossil world was alit last year and the year before when the images of a complete megalodon skeleton were seen for the very first time. And apparently one of these specimens has made its way into Zurich, into one of the museums down there, but it's privately owned museum. It's not one that can be accessed publicly by researchers. So no researcher has verified the find of that particular individual. I've looked at the pictures intensely because you can imagine it fascinates me. An actual skeleton of a megalodon? Of course I'm going to look at it. Looking at it, it seems to be a composite. So a number of individuals that have been placed together to make it look like it's one complete individual. I think Peru and that of Bayside are probably two of the only places in the entire world where we may actually find articulated remains of megalodon skeleton and all. And this isn't something that's shocking from the fossil record. We do find complete sharks in much older fossil deposits. We go back to 350 million years ago, Carboniferous even. There are complete skeletons of sharks that are known throughout there. In fact, one of the oldest known complete sharks, Cladocellaces, is almost complete. You can even see the pectoral fins and the entirety of the jaw. It just needs very specific requirements in order to be preserved within the fossil record. And we have a tendency of not finding that throughout the entirety of the Cenozoic within the last 66 million years, which is a huge shame. So that gives you an insight, especially into that individual that's now at Zurich.
Ben, amazing. We could go on and on all night long. I'm sure you could, and I'm sure we could all stick around.
I can. Do you want me to? I can do it. So.
Look, we'll have to end it there. We'll have to respect everybody's time. Ben, thank you so much for joining in with us and bringing everybody together. On behalf of the Port Phillip EcoCentre and everybody that's here, thank you for putting on this presentation. I'd like to thank everybody that joined us tonight in the space. It's awesome to bring people together online, in person when we can, but for these very special events. We've got more of them coming up. I'd like to send a big shout out to Dee Dee for all her work putting this together. Thank you so much for bringing these events and making them possible. Lisa from the EcoCentre, thank you so much again for rallying us and making these possible. It wouldn't be possible without the support of all the attendees. Thank you. Make sure you check out the link to Ben's website. As he mentioned, that's what can make things like this possible, because the more discoveries they can make, the more seminars like this we can provide. Please support the EcoCentre wherever you can. Check out our website to see how. Stay tuned for the next episode coming soon through Zoom. I hope you have all enjoyed yourselves. Ben, any last words before we go?
Look, we're going to be hosting another Zoom in April, which is going to be looking at the evolution of the whales. I haven't come up with a witty title just yet, but it's going to be very exciting. It's going to cover the last 50 million years of their evolution and how they evolved into some of the most terrifying predators we've ever seen. And I think the Megalodon will also be a side act in that one as well. But Nadav, I wanted to thank you as well for the incredible words that you had at the beginning as well. And if you can, make sure you support the EcoCentre with all of our events. Check out the future events that we've got at the EcoCentre website as well. But thank you so much, Nadav, Lisa, Dee Dee, everyone else that's here. I've had a lot of fun. Whale of a time.
Bye for now, everyone.
Yeah.